Good morning, all good readers, book-related people, booktubers, anyone who happens to be watching this. And today we are discussing, as the thumbnail suggests, The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey, with no reflection now. So, The Mercy of Gods is a brand new science fiction book, which I didn't realize just how new it was when I borrowed it from the library. It is from 2024, and the second book in the series being the captive something or other. I took notes. I have been given this absolutely beautiful note-taking book, which you may see hints of every now and then. So it is the first in the Captives War series, and for anyone who's been burned by series that don't complete in the past, you may want to wait on this one, because the sequel to The Mercy of Gods doesn't come out until next year, until 2026. Will I read it? Watch this space. So, The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. James S.A. Corey, of course, are the authors, and they're involved in the TV series as well, of The Expanse. The Expanse is a series of 9 novels, all of them thicker than this one. Hence, once again, you may want to wait and see on this one before starting it. Leviathan Wakes and all the rest of them. The Expanse was a wonderful, wonderful series, and I picked up this book based on the author's name. The author's name, being James S.A. Corey, is of course a pen name for 2 individual writers, Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. So The Mercy of Gods, I, by the way, started it off as an audiobook. I started it off as an audiobook, I think, probably over a month ago. I had to keep renewing it from the Libby app, and finally I'd renewed it so many times I had to give it back and borrow it again. And finally I ended up just getting out the physical copy to finish it off. While this looks like a huge chunk of a book, in actual fact the writing is quite large by classic science fiction and fantasy standards, and there is a lot of spacing. So a mere 418 pages shouldn't technically have taken me as long as it did. Though I wasn't doing many road trips at the time. Road trips are where I get through my audiobooks the most. So this is quite substantially exciting looking when you look at the back cover or the descriptions online, which I didn't see that many of before I borrowed it. As I said, it was on the strength of the fact that these 2 authors made The Expanse that I tried this one. I don't read that much brand spanking new science fiction, and this brand new spanking science fiction and its epicness remind me a lot of epic fantasy, in a way that older fantasy and science fiction, even the ones like Raymond Feist that go for many volumes, doesn't seem to be this sort of epicishness. Anyway, so when annihilation is the rule, survival must be won. The Carracks, part Empire, part Hive, has waged wars of conquest for centuries, destroying or enslaving species across the galaxy in its conflict with an ancient and deathless enemy, and that is a spoiler right there. I didn't know any of that. I went into it, and where I started was this long academic party, and it lasted for ages. There was a huge hall on this planet called, it sounded like Azure, though it's written like Anjin, and we follow this one character, Daffodilcore, who's wandering around. He's a lab tech, or maybe a lab assistant, in this really, really innovative, exciting, award-winning science group that are figuring out the way to merge 2 different species. The species that is native to Azure is this land coral type based organism, and the humans, when they settled some time back, and we hear they've lost track of all of the rest of humanity, brought all their species. So they've got oaks and beeches and night singing birds and all that stuff. Daffod is working on a team headed by Tonna Fries. It's spelt Fries, but it's pronounced by the narrator Fries, as in, do you want fries with that? He's working with this team that has finally found the first building block block that will be a crossover in the biology of the native azure species and the human ones. Just this tiny little protein link we gather that combines them. And all of this is really exciting, and it's my jam. It's not what the book is about. So we start off with this huge advent. Daffyd is basically listening to strangers talk while he's waiting for Tonna and his girlfriend Ilse to turn up. Daffyd, we hear, has got this crush on Ilse, though she is with the team leader Tonna Fries. There's a lot of minutiae about this opening scene. The people, the places, the science background, the planet. It's a bit of an introduction to Daffyd and a tiny bit of an introduction to a couple of other characters, but most of this is utterly irrelevant to the rest of the 400 odd pages because none of this reoccurs. Most of the characters don't really lead into anything, and it feels like it lasts for a long time. During this conversation with some random stranger, Daffyd gets a hint that their research group is about to be broken up. Tonna Fry, who's a volatile type, hits the roof over them, and the next few dozen pages are all these academic worrying about the future, arguing about grants, throwing one of their team out because they knew about it. All this academic minutiae, and if you've ever been part of an academia, it will all ring true. That's the reason why I'm not very much in academia anymore, and it is not what I read science fiction for, but it's very, very well done. So it will probably intrigue many people. People who are still stuck in the grant committee treadwheel will probably find this enjoyable. Now, around about part 2, page 70-ish, we finally get this alien invasion that we were promised. We don't learn more about it than, or even as much about it as we have on the back of the book. We've got this very measured, very scheduled invasion of Azure, and it's obviously presented as a fait accompli. There's no way that this is going to fail, and we learn that integrally. The Carracks are Carracks. The invaders are actually not the invaders. They're the organizing mentality behind all the hundreds of species that they've incorporated into their empire and their battle plan. All the actual battling is done by others. The way I visualize them from S.A. Corey's description is like a massive, slightly intelligent lobster whose smaller legs are actually a bit more like a praying mantis, and they're land-based, of course, so there's that. Now, we hear the fate of many of the individuals of the research team. One of them dies instantly because the Carracks' battle plan is to have 1/8 of the population instantly die by being bitten by insects, which is a different species, and instantly die. Their only purpose in life is to bite the 8%, and that's it. We then have other species, Soft Lothar are one, others, rounding up all the humans, and we've got a very, very long, elongated experience from description from several of the different research organizers. Daffyd Alcaba still maintains his position as a primary narrator in many ways. Well, not narrator, a primary antagonist that we follow more often than we follow all the others. So after a really, really long battle scene that manages to be almost entirely absent of battles or excitement or fighting scenes, they are all loaded onto a transport and taken to another world. The part on the transport is again long, full with minutiae. And if you love this writing style, you will love all of this, because it is well done and is well written. But it felt very meh to me. Anyway, when they finally get to this other alien place, Tonna Fry's little research group is all back together again, the ones that are still alive, and they're set to this task by the Carracks to combine proteins or life of two animals. One's like a three-legged turtle, and I still want an explanation for an animal that doesn't have bilateral symmetry. I want an explanation, Corey. I might even be willing to read on if there's an explanation for non-bilateral symmetry. I don't have high hopes. Anyhow, turtle-like thing needs to be fed using these pulpy berry-like things as a factory, and they have to figure that out. They don't know anything about these species. They don't know where they come from. They're given very little information. Duffet, as the lab assistant, guy who cleans up, is got the least status, research status, science status on the team. But he has a talent that we learnt in the opening scene, is that he likes listening to things, listening to people, figuring out the structure of everything around him. And he, at this point, becomes the only one who is doing that, and hence the only interesting one. The other one's obsessing about turtles and molecules, which could have been written to be fun, but wasn't. Duffet, however, is going out into the greater world, and the world building is spectacular. It is beautiful. It is visual. I've got images of these transport arches they describe in there. It's great. And there are gazillions of different species. I've got to hand it to James S.A. Corey. They do aliens en masse better than anyone I've read recently. Eventually, Duffet finds out a lot of structure. They're being run by the librarian Carix, who doesn't really give them much information, but Duffet is striving to find information. And eventually, he gets a translator. So, on the invasion of Azure, all these little boxes were being held around the throats of anyone who tries to communicate with humans. The humans on Fry's team have not been given one, and there's no way to communicate with aliens at large. However, they do eventually give one. So they've had this lab set up with equipment that's similar to the equipment they had back on Azure, but they keep getting invaded by these strange monkey-like creatures, not monkeys. Eventually, it turns into a full-blown war between the not monkeys and the team, and the not monkeys kill one of them. They go fully ballistic and go after the not monkeys. They do that so successfully that eventually the monkeys submit, and as a present of their submission, they give them a translator box, which lets Duffet really get going and start questioning other aliens until he finally finds more humans. They hadn't found any other humans in all that time, but there were plenty there. At this point, we probably need to consider spoilers, so I won't go on with the plot and how it happens, but I will mention some things along the way. My favourite characters were actually the aliens. There were these murder crows in the corridors of the captive world, just standing in the corridor staring at the wall. Great concept. The monkeys, the not monkeys, are described as vaguely mammalian, but they've got a respiration system that's actually more similar to birds. Instead of the air going in and out through the same way and along the same surfaces, it's linear. It goes through in one unidirectional. So that was really cool. There's also this other species which is described as a cross between a cuttlefish and a goat, and I can't even visualize that, but I love trying. In fact, a cuttlefish's eyes are very malleable, so they could easily mimic a goat's eyes. Maybe that's the goat. Anyway, great stuff. Loved the aliens. All the tropes of alien invasion, maybe hero's journey, not sure about that one, and enslavement and forced displacement are done, and they're done well. What isn't done terribly well is characters. I have to say that on the whole, I feel like there weren't any. There were lots of people, but the only one that approaches having a character is Duffet, and maybe even an alien, I'm not sure. But, so it was almost a mystifying book. This should have been a really exciting book because there was so much battle, there was so much conflict, there was so much that should be exciting and engaging, and somehow James S.A. Corey managed to write it really, really bland and really, really meh. They write incessant minutiae, right from the front where you're at this party where nothing is going to matter later on in the book except 2 or 3 fragments. We hear in excruciating detail every leaf on every bush, as it were. And it's more annoying to me than anything else. It's got a whole party, none of which is going to matter. The next scene is incredibly minute in detail of all these tables in the refectory, and none of it's going to matter. And you're this huge blow-up scene about academia, none of it's going to matter. It's all just scene setting for the characters, and there's way too much of it for my taste. Now, epic fantasies, of which I'm reading one at the moment, have a lot of time to build up the visuals. And if you like this style of writing, you will love this book. If you enjoyed the Expanse books, Leviathan Wakes and all of those, you will almost certainly enjoy this book as well, because it's got the same level of detail. And the detail is beautifully well written. I'm not saying that it isn't. I just found it more irritating than anything else. I started with the audiobook, which was narrated by Jefferson Mays. Jefferson Mays has got a very nice, well elocuted voice. It's very understated, and it is very, very well paced. It's slow. He narrates slowly. That's why this book took so much longer than it needed to. I almost never speed up narration or YouTube or anything unless I'm at work and it's called for. But Jonathan Mays was someone that I could easily have sped up, because you really don't need to have this much space between words. And also his accent was odd for me. I've mentioned Tonna Fries. It's spelt Tonna Fries with that. I actually originally got out this book because I couldn't understand his accent or intonation enough to know the words. I couldn't picture the names, like Zinnia is actually a Zinnia with an S. You've got Daffod. If that wasn't a Welsh name, I wouldn't have had the foggiest notion what he was saying. The planet, I'm still not sure about. Most of the species that I mentioned by name, I really, really wouldn't be able to identify them in the written text from the way he narrates it. Good narration. There are plenty of books that I think would benefit from his lovely voice and measured narration style, but I don't think it worked for battle scenes which were already written to be quite bland. Okay, so the uninteresting characters that one can't get invested in, the minutiae of detail of everything, including the grain of the chair they're sitting on, but complete lack of investment in battle scenes, which I wouldn't mind hearing a bit more about than they ran down the corridor and shot something. Is that it? This is like the huge defining battle that will allow them to continue to survive, and that's it? Okay, so it did grow on me. At around about 60%, I would definitely decided that I wasn't going to be DNFing it. By the end, around about 80% or so, I was coming to actually not mind Daffod Alcor too much. I didn't actually like him. I didn't like any of the characters, which were largely non-existent. But if any could be born with in future books, Daffod was it. Which is just as well, because it's probably the one that they're going to expand on. What else? I've got a lot to say, and a lot of it sounds like it's quite complainy. It's a good book for some people. It's not my book. The second one might never be my book. I finished this one, felt no particular urge to find out what happens later, because I suspect that not very much. In this whole book, we could easily have written it in half the page number if we stopped describing things that don't matter to the plot. And I suspect the next book will be the same. You either like the writing style or you don't. You like these epic wandering narrations, whether they're fantasy or science fiction, or you don't. I recently saw a video by Bookpilled. He described modern science fiction as middling, and I think that is the kindest way to say it. For me personally, this was a middling book. It wasn't bad, it wasn't particularly good. I don't particularly care. I will mention one other thing that rescued it, that made me not having DNF'd it by page 60, is the swarm. So on the back of the book, it's already told us that the characters are fighting a conflict all across the galaxy with enemies that we never encounter in this book, that we never hear about. But what we do encounter early on is the swarm. The swarm, we find out, have been sent by an enemy of the characters, an enemy that we never see really otherwise. They have invaded a human on the planet of Azure or Ajan, depending on how your pronunciation. And the idea is they know the Carracks are going to collect people and take them back to their homeworld. They've injected this swarm of created minds as a information gathering method to go back to the planet to collect the information and then send it back to the enemies of the characters, which we never encounter in this whole book, but we might in the next one or in the next 15, whatever. The Swarm was an interesting plot builder, and we first encounter it while our Tonna Fry movement are having this huge hysterical blow up about funding. There is a woman sitting in the corner of the cafeteria eating a sandwich, salad sandwich specifically. We had to learn it was a salad sandwich. While they were doing that, she is not a human being anymore. She is the Swarm, which has taken over the woman who is the Shell. The woman who is the Shell still has some basic consciousness left and fights against the Swarm, which uses her information to navigate in the world believably. We are told from the start the Swarm will kill any of its hosts, and it will eventually move on to another host. So at some point, we learn that the Swarm has moved on to another host, and we're given this coy little thing. Which member of Tonna Fry's team is it in? We know it's one of them. Again, I didn't care. So sure, I'd seen these individual characters. I knew which one that it wasn't in for sure, but I didn't know which of the others it was in, and I didn't care because none of them felt like real people. For all that I'd just heard them argue over funding for the last, 20, 30 pages, they didn't feel real, and if they were real, I didn't love them. Hello, I do love you, but you don't love me today. Angry bird. Say hello to the bird. Say hello. Hello. Chirp. Chirp. Reepicheep wanted to eat this book. He kept wanting to chew The Mercy of Gods. He kept heading toward it with a gleam in his little eye. And if it had have been my book that I purchased and not a library book, I would have let him because I didn't much like it. So, not sorry that I read it. I do need a little bit of leavening of modern science fiction to balance all the classic science fiction. They are good authors. If I had to read the first one in an epic series spanning however many novels, however many galaxies, however many planets, and however many minutiae of detail with not very much happening, I have to say James S.A. Corey, no regrets. Might even read another one later on. It would be a fast read if it wasn't an audio. Read good books.